The fight for Afghanistan is inching towards the capital, Kabul. The Taliban says its latest attacks on government leaders marks the start of a new campaign. Could this mean a return to full-scale war? And have peace talks become pointless? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Nick Clarke. The Taliban is gaining strength across Afghanistan, quickly taking territory as foreign troops leave after 20 years of war. Afghan forces are struggling to hold back fighters surrounding provincial capitals in the south and in the west. And Kabul, which has been spared the worst of the violence, is now looking vulnerable. Gunmen detonated a car bomb and fired shots near the defence minister's home in the fortified Green Zone. The Taliban is warning of more attacks on government leaders. The United Nations is urging all sides to protect civilians and says the intense fighting could trigger a new humanitarian crisis. Charlotte Bellis has more now from Kabul.
The Taliban have claimed responsibility for this attack outside the defence minister's home in Kabul. It says that it was carried out by its Martyrdom Brigade, which is a dedicated unit under the Taliban's military arm of trained suicide bombers. It says that it deployed a car bomb outside his home, and then there were multiple gunmen who tried to storm the residence. Civilians were hurt and killed in this attack, and in the statement that followed from the Taliban, they said this is the beginning of retaliatory operations against key figures and leaders of the Kabul administration. So a significant escalation for them, and concerning for residents in Kabul that perhaps the Taliban may start to do more bombings like this, and it may put their security in jeopardy by getting caught up in these type of Taliban attacks. Further south in Helmand and Lashkar, that really is the epicenter of fighting between the Afghan army and the Taliban. It's been heavy for a number of days now, but today locals say it is certainly the worst, with more bombardments from the air and street-to-street fighting as the Afghan government tries to retake control of the city. They've asked civilians to evacuate. Incredibly dangerous for civilians who are now being told to leave their homes and go into an active war zone. Across the country, other cities are also under pressure as the Taliban pushes forward, gaining more territory and with significant military momentum. Charlotte Bellis for Inside Story.
Well, Afghanistan's president blames what he calls the US's sudden troop withdrawal for the escalating violence. In his address to Parliament earlier this week, Ashraf Ghani said that Washington's push for negotiations created doubt and ambiguity and insists the Taliban is not committed to peace.
The situation which we are facing is due to the sudden decision to withdraw. I told the American president that I respect your decision because it was his decision. But I knew that this will have some consequences and the crisis management will be put on Afghans.
All right, let's start the discussion. Bring in our guests. Joining us on Skype from Kabul is Victoria Fontan, a professor of peace studies at the American University of Afghanistan. In Pittsburgh, we have Colin Clarke, director of policy and research of the Soufan group. Also from Kabul in Afghanistan, Fahim Sadat, who is head of the International Relations Department at Kardan University. Welcome all to the programme. Victoria, I'd like to start with you first. You're there right now in Afghanistan, feeling it, living it. Tell us what it's like. What's the atmosphere like? What are people thinking? Where is this heading?
Well, many are quite concerned about the security situation. A lot of my colleagues now are trying to leave the country, but at the same time, the fact that the town of Herat did not fall to the hands of the Taliban has quite galvanized the population and given them quite some hope. So all in all, mitigated feelings of the fear, but also the certainty that the population of urban centers is not going to let the Taliban take cities so easily.
Well, one of those urban centres, of course, is Lashkar, and Fahim Sadat. Thousands are trapped or fleeing for their lives in Lashkar in Helmand province as the Taliban, continue their advance. There's bodies on the streets, and overall, it is a very troubling situation, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. According to the reports, 2,400 people are only displaced yesterday. and there are 40 civilian deaths and almost 118 or more than that civilian casualties in Helmand. And this is almost the 7th day that the assault on Helmand is going on, although the city is not yet completely under the hold of the Taliban, but the government is trying to put up a resistance, and I believe the battle is still continuing in Helmand.
And Colin, over there in Pittsburgh in the United States, what's your sense of direction of travel here? Is Afghanistan heading over the precipice? Are we heading for full-scale war?
I really hope not, but the view from the States seems to be that. And, this is something that myself and a lot of other folks in the broader counterterrorism community have warned against when the president announced his withdrawal in April, with really no contingency plan for what comes next. And to rely on the Taliban to be any meaningful part of a peace agreement, I think is it's naive, frankly.
Right, well, we'll get on to the peace talks in a second, but let's just look first at areas of Taliban control. The Taliban has taken more territory in recent weeks than it has at any time since it fell from power 20 years ago. In May, it controlled about 20% of the country, and that's shown here in purple. But as US and other foreign troops pulled out, Taliban fighters ramped up their attacks. And in the last 2 months, half of the country has fallen under the group's rule. It is a critical test, of course, for the Afghan government as the fighters advance and surround now the capital, Kabul. This week, the Taliban moved into the center of the cities of Lashkar, as we've just been discussing, and Kandahar. So, Victoria, given all of that, how do you assess the Taliban tactics here, which seems to be pretty much avoiding full-scale confrontation, but then there is also this slow assimilation of areas targeting cities and also targeting local economies?
Absolutely, and I think that this would be a tactical mistake for them because they are quickly losing Afghan hearts and minds. They are now seen by the local population as taking the populations of cities hostage in order to gain control and in order to gain power. And in that sense, whilst their tactic of encircling cities was working up until now, actually moving for those cities and harming civilians is something that could keep the balance of popular support in some areas against them.
And now we have this new strategy, the so-called announced martyrdom brigade, attacking government leaders. Victoria, what do you make of that?
Well, it makes sense, of course, to actually get rid of the top of the Afghan National Security Forces would definitely strike a blow to those forces. However, this is something that has been expected. There hasn't been a complex attack in Kabul for the past 3 months, and one would hope that the government has ensured the safety of its highest officials. Of course, as we know, President Ghani presented a security plan without much of a detail, as in what this plan entails. So again, we would hope that now they have learned their lesson and they will have provided security for their top officials.
All right. Well, we heard from President Ghani a little bit earlier, blaming the US withdrawal for this escalation. Colin, Clarke, do you think that withdrawal is a miscalculation by the US President Biden?
I do. However, I think it's a miscalculation from the point of view of Afghan stability. It's probably a shrewd calculation in terms of U.S. domestic politics. This is a popular move among large swaths of the U.S. population, and it's one of the few areas that I can think of where there's bipartisan support. The Trump administration was moving toward a withdrawal as well, and President Biden continued that. Those in opposition seem to be, folks like myself or others in, academia or think tanks or the policy world that are warning of catastrophic consequences in terms of al-Qaeda rebuilding its networks.
And Colin, in assessing the prospect for this withdrawal, this swift withdrawal, would they have anticipated what has happened, this sudden escalation and Taliban dominance?
I think they've likely mapped out multiple scenarios, knowing that this was going to be one and probably had a strong chance of being one. The U.S. is banking on this being contained to Afghanistan, but I think that this instability is likely to spill over into other parts of the region.
And if it heads in the direction that it appears to be heading, if it continues for some time, years even, is it something then that would present a problem for the United States, a situation where they may reconsider sending troops back in?
I think it depends what happens. If you look at some kind of external operation or spectacular terrorist attack in the West, the pressure will be immense for the U.S. and its allies to do more than they're doing now. If the problems may, remain contained largely within Afghanistan, again, I think, the conversation and the zeitgeist in the Beltway these days is it's all about great power competition. China, Russia, after 20 years, people and seeing few results, people want to leave the global war on terrorism behind. And this is emblematic of that.
Fahim Sadat in Kabul, how different is this scenario that we're seeing here in 2021 to 1996 when the Taliban last took over Afghanistan?
Well, the situation is different in so many perspectives. At that time, you had the Taliban being the government, and you have the Northern Alliance in the steppes of the country fighting the Taliban. And now you have a government who is ruling in Kabul, and you have the Taliban who is fighting the government. Although the similarities are that back then, the Northern Alliance as the armed opposition had little territory with themselves. And the Taliban were almost ruling 95% of Afghanistan, while now the government is controlling half of the country, and almost more than 200 districts are with the Taliban, who is now an armed opposition. And apparently, it seems that the Taliban have taken the decision of attacking the urban centers. Although the government is talking of consolidation and the capabilities to hold the Taliban back off, but apparently it seems that the Taliban are still having the momentum. So what has not changed for the people of Afghanistan is that back in 2001 there was a battle and Afghanistan was in a state of war, and now in 2021 there is still battle going on in the provinces and Afghanistan is in a state of war.
But can I just jump in there, Fahim? Do you think the Taliban has the potential to take over the whole country again?
See, Nick, the thing is that the Taliban's current battlefield gains, particularly after May 1, is largely because of the security vacuum that was created at the last stages of the withdrawal. So, and the government was on the strategic retreat. So this strategic retreat and the Taliban surge cannot be solely interpreted as the strength of the Taliban militarily. But what is now a critical test to both sides, because the Taliban are going now to attack the large urban centers, and the government is putting up defenses or trying to hold them off. So the true test of both military strengths are yet to be seen.
Victoria, I can see you're keen to come in.
Yes, I would say that the urban centers are really unlikely to be taken by the Taliban. Of course, Herat did not fall thanks to US air support, and it's hoped that this will continue for the time to come. But also, there is an enormous amount of popular uprisings against the Taliban in support of the Afghan National Security Forces, and people, random people, regular people taking up arms. There are large parts of the country that are very unlikely to fall to Taliban hands, like the Panjshir region. So it's, I would say that the Taliban have been quite lucky up until now. They definitely have taken advantage of a security void, but at the same time, some of those regions that were, or districts that were captured now are being contested. And I don't think that they can go much further than where they've gone so far.
Colin, Clarke, the thing is the Taliban needs and wants this international legitimacy to keep aid flowing apart from anything else. And so that would prevent them from bidding for a complete takeover, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I don't think they need a complete takeover of the country to exert their influence. We've seen it already. But again, I don't think the Taliban is ever going to break with groups like Al-Qaeda and their ilk, especially if the violence continues. The Taliban will need Al-Qaeda to reinforce its ranks.
And Fahim, Taliban and the Taliban exerting their influence, what does that actually mean? Because they say they have the best interests of Afghanistan at heart, and at the same time they believe that an Islamic state structure would be the most beneficial for the country. So what would it mean?
In terms of constitutional views, we know very limited about the Taliban's perspectives because they are not that expressive when it comes to these issues. All they have always mentioned is that we want an Islamic, at first it was Islamic Emirate, and now apparently it seems that they are talking about Islamic system. But when you really ask it that, what do you mean? How would you interpret all the issues within the Islamic system? They say then we will add to these things back at that time. So their constitutional views are very limited, and you really don't understand what exactly they mean by the Islamic system. But if we are talking about the Taliban 1.0, means when they were ruling Afghanistan, at that time, a lot of things were limited, such as freedom of speech, women's participation in public domain, and as well as women's education and girls' education. But if as we hear that the Taliban have changed, and now if we are to face a Taliban 2.0, means the new version of the Taliban, where they are somehow tolerant and pluralistic, and as well as they respect the international engagement with the international community, then I think people would be at ease. But if they remain the Taliban that were back in 1990s, I think that would be worrisome, and as well as that will concern people, because Afghanistan's people have changed a lot since that time, particularly since 2001, because you have an emerging civil society, you have people who are educated, you have people who have gone and seen the world. So things have changed. So I think if the Taliban are the Taliban of the 1990s, they would also find it difficult to subdue the large young population of today's Afghanistan.
Right. And Victoria, is that something that you would agree with? The Taliban are saying that they're committed to the peace process and they will maintain the civil rights that have developed in recent years. Are you concerned about whether or not that's true?
Absolutely. I'm not really concerned. I know it's not true. They have already perpetrated war crimes in the Helmand province, in Kandahar. I have a student who lost two of her cousins. We have colleagues in different parts of the country who have told us that they have already closed the schools down because they want to re-establish their own educational system. So actions speak louder than words. And as far as war crimes and closing down schools is concerned, they haven't changed a bit.
And what about the peace talks, Colin, Clarke, in Pittsburgh? What are the implications of this latest escalation as far as the peace talks are concerned here in Doha?
I think the Doha talks are done. I mean, we're well past the point of no return for thinking about some kind of a negotiated settlement. We can't take the Taliban at their word. Clearly, they're not operating in good faith, just as many predicted, including myself, the entire time. I largely looked at the negotiations as somewhat of a smoke show or a veneer to allow the United States to extricate its forces under the top cover of some kind of political negotiation. But it's never really been about that, and clearly it isn't now.
Fahim, Sadat, the Doha talks are done. Do you agree?
I would say with respect that we still have a chance in the Doha talks. What I believe is that the Taliban at the end of the day would return to the negotiation table to reach a political settlement with the government. But till that, I believe the Taliban's recent strategy is to maximize their power, because this maximization would help them strengthen their position at the negotiation table. Because as we see, there are some limitations on the Taliban which they feel if they overtake Kabul militarily, such as legitimacy, international recognition, and most importantly, as I have always said, international assistance for the governance and as well as for the development of Afghanistan. Something that the Taliban know that they won't be able to do it unless they don't have it from the international community. And the international community would definitely not be available if they take over Kabul militarily. So their calculation at the moment must be that let's capitalize over the vacuum that has been created. Let's maximize our power and then go with a far strengthened position to the negotiation table, particularly when the fall season comes to Afghanistan, where the environment changes and battlefield is difficult then.
Right. Victoria, what do you think? Is there room for further progress at the peace talks?
Well, let's remember that the Doha Agreement is a withdrawal agreement of the United States with the Taliban. The peace talks between the Afghan government and the Taliban haven't really started. And so there definitely are some calls from within the Afghan state, meaning, the larger political scene and also civil society, to engage in some form of a dialogue and stop the violence. That will is definitely there, and I think needs to be capitalized on from all sides.
And Colin, what about regional players? And presumably this Taliban escalation is not in the interest of, say, India or Pakistan, certainly not to have complete Taliban control. What do they bring to bear in this equation?
Well, I think all the players in the region, right? The Iranians, the Russians, Chinese, Indians, Pakistanis, they all have their own desired outcome. They all have their own priorities, and those don't align. We're going to see a lot of jostling for power. We're going to see attempts at, patronage and proxy warfare, I think, as this situation develops. And typically, from my study of insurgencies, the more entities involved, the longer something lasts. So that's not a good sign. So,
Colin, what's your gut feeling about where this is heading?
I think, heading into 2022, we're going to be looking at an Afghanistan that is controlled by the Taliban in large portions of the country. Not entirely. And at that time, I think we're likely to see the growth of transnational jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda, like others. That my main concern, my main fear is that Afghanistan once again turns into a magnet for foreign fighters. And there's a flow or a mobilization to the country, which then again acts as a force multiplier for many of the most dangerous terrorist groups there.
And Victoria, what's your sense of the impact of this on regional stability? And indeed global stability, I should say.
Yes, from my eyes, this is Iraq in 2012, and just before the rise of the Islamic State, there is definitely a vacuum that has been created. A lot of foreign fighters are starting to influx into the country. There are so many different groups out there that are not necessarily part of that Doha agreement. And regionally, of course, this is going to create problems, which is why the Taliban have been trying to legitimize themselves in the eyes of their neighbors. They have met the Chinese. They have made declarations with regards to neighboring countries. But at the end of the day, they will not control all the terrorist groups in Afghanistan. And the frontiers, again, between their own ranks and those groups are very porous. And so from that perspective, it's, again, letting them advance and definitely not really being careful about the security vacuum that is being created at the moment at this moment of heavy fighting is definitely going to destabilize the region. And Pakistan will be on the, let's say...
Fahim, Sadat, we've got just about 30 seconds left for you to answer this. What is there for Ashraf Ghani? What card can he play to try and sort this out?
I think the president still has cards. He has air power, which the Taliban doesn't have. He has heavy weaponry. He also has the recent campaign of Allahu Akbar, which seems that people are coming in support of the government, and as well as he has the backing of the US in terms of airstrikes. I think these are the options that the president have, but it also depends on how he will be implementing these assets and options effectively in the battlefield, how united the Republic side would stand against the Taliban.
All right, everybody, we'll have to leave it there. Fahim Sadat, appreciate that. Also, Victoria, Fontan and Colin, Clarke there in Pittsburgh. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see this and all our previous programmes again at any time by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, just go to our Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Nick Clarke, and the rest of the team here, it's goodbye for now.